Good morning to everyone, and thank you for finding the time to join us today. So I'm sorry about this 5 minutes delay because we had another webinar in Italian. And as you know, in Italy, we're not so strict like in Switzerland, so we're in a bit of delay. But we will try to be strict with the second edition in English. So in the beginning, I want to thank our wonderful friends at O.M.a.R Rare Lab. This organization made this meeting possible for us today, together with the unconditional contribution of PTC Therapeutics. So I also want to thank Pat Furlong. She is the founding president. I invite Pat to open her webcam and to join by my side. Pat Furlong, she is the founding president and the CEO of Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy. And I met Pat in 1994. Well, I have to say she met me because she came to Rome and spent her time to present me an overview of the Duchenne situation in the world. Pat has been my coach for this very long time. I have to thank her because she's been a coach to me, and she's been teaching me everything every day. And I always take the chance on the Thanksgiving Day to send my thank you to Pat, even if we don't meet in real world. But we hope to have another chance in the future. So she's still fighting on behalf of us all. And while I'm old and I had to retire, she knows I'm a quitter, but so it's not a problem. But it's indeed the symbol of us, all us parents in the world. And she continues to be very much involved in research and advocacy for Duchenne. And I also want to thank Professor Francesco Montoni. He's the director of the Dubowitz Neuromuscular Center at UCL, the Great Ormond Street Institute of Child Health in London. And I also invite him to join me with the webcam and to use the microphone because they are really expert in this field, because every one of us has been using Zoom to survive from day to day in our past year. So we are probably more used to Zoom than talking in the real world. I hope we will get back to the old school as soon as possible. So I also remember meeting Francesco Montoni in 1995 at the Hammersmith Hospital, where Francesco is one of the very few Duchenne and Becker scientists in the world, because Duchenne is a rare disease. So we have also rare scientists to help us to fight this rare disease. So thank you both to find the time to join us. And no need for me to say that you can talk and interrupt as you like for the sake of our goal. We're just the three of us, so no problem. It is very informal, so you can talk as you like, and to interrupt, you can interrupt as you prefer. So our target today is informing the families and other representative of patient groups from many different countries. So hello to everyone, and to everyone is connected now. Hope you're not suffering too much this COVID situation. And our focus today is to share the work that has been done by the Scientific Office of Parent Project in Italy. So this is a good chance for me to say thank you to Gloria Antonini, Fernanda De Angelis, Ilaria Zito, translating into lay language the last two scientific papers from the STRIDE project. The document has been very well organized, and we produce a very nice brochure thanks to the work of other wonderful collaborators like Aurora and many others too, who also helped us in refining the language and so on. So this brochure is now available for free and for everyone, and for other international groups. If they decide to translate it in their languages or publish it, they only have to inform us and to give us the information regarding the use they plan to do with this kind of brochure. You will find the link in the download instruction in the invitation you received of this meeting. You will find also the link in the chat of this Zoom meeting. But you can also find the brochure in the Parent Project website, or you can email one of us and we will be happy to share the link and to help you to use the brochure for your group of people, in group of families in your own country. So today we will have the chance to have a quick look at this brochure, and we also want to clarify the challenging topic of the registries. We did it for Italian families, and now we are going to do it for worldwide families. So what is STRIDE? Yes, it is another acronym. You know, we love them. We love the acronyms. They're wonderful. So let's try to understand what it means. The strategic targeting of registries and international database of excellence. It is a registry, and it is the first drug registry for patients with Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy. And it represents the largest real-world study of Duchenne patients with nonsense mutation to date. Again, also in this brochure, we discovered that STRIDE is a post-approval observational international study collecting long-term safety and effectiveness data on the use of ataluren in Duchenne patients with nonsense mutation in the real world and clinical practice. So this was listed by regulatory authorities for the post-marketing assessment of the use of ataluren. And it's underway in countries where ataluren is available commercially and through an early access program. So I would like to ask Francesco, what is ataluren and what are the nonsense mutations, but also the meaning of largest real-world study and post-marketing? Those terms are not probably familiar to families and kind of patients around the world.
Thank you, Filippo, and again, congratulations for the work you do, and also congratulations for the work that Pat does on the other side of the pond, and actually worldwide in truth. So the question, you ask a few questions, and I will perhaps start from the basic of the general terminology. What does post-marketing surveillance means, and so on and so forth. And I suppose the issue is for relatively or even very rare condition, the clinical trial, the companies do struggle to find sufficient evidence that is definitive and conclusive and long-term evidence of efficacy, not only because companies they don't want to do a good job. It's very difficult to do clinical trial for 10 years. And the more rare the condition is, the more difficult that is. And therefore, the companies have an obligation to perform clinical trials to demonstrate, firstly, if the drug is safe. That is still, primum non nocere. I think you are a pharmacist, Filippo, so you understand this very well. And of course, the clinical trial will tell you if there is a major safety signal, but not necessarily if there was a very unusual adverse event. That is, you need more people to be exposed and exposed for longer. And secondly, also the efficacy. The company will collect the efficacy. Usually, the clinical trials may have a duration of 1 year, a year and a half, 2 years occasionally, not 5 years or not 10 years. But of course, the importance for us who prescribe the drugs, for the government or the insurers that pay for the drugs, and for the patients and the families who take the drug, the question is, how much this drug is helping me or my child. And therefore, the data from the companies need to be helped by data in the real world that will continue to collect information on efficacy, but also on the safety, so that you spread the number of people who are studied and recruit many more people, and you get better information. So I think is the importance of the registry, because you do need to collect the information in a way or the other. And the second is the real world. Then the question the second question you asked me is, what are nonsense mutation and what is ataluren? Why ataluren is not used in every individual with Duchenne muscular dystrophy? And I think this is related to the fact that not all individuals with Duchenne have the same type of mutation. The most common one are the deletions and duplication, and together they will probably account for 75% of 75 to 80% of people with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Approximately 10% have a different type of mutation that it took longer to be identified compared to the more easy to identify deletion and duplication. And these are the so-called nonsense mutations. These are the particular mutations that are amenable to be helped by ataluren. And an example I make in UK, I know that in Italy you make a different example, Filippo, is if I was going to compare and to explain what happens in an individual with Duchenne muscular dystrophy who has a different, who has a mutation, I always take, because that's a very visual, the example of a bridge, and I take the Golden Gate Bridge because it's a suspended bridge, is 2.5 kilometers. To some extent, the frustration that many physicians and many families has, that even the deletion is not that you're missing of these 2.5 kilometers, you're missing 2.5 kilometers. In the majority of the individuals with deletions, you may be missing a few hundred meters in between, but the bridge will collapse, because if you cut, 500 meters from the center of the bridge cannot sustain. Now, it is even more frustrating to some extent with the nonsense mutation, because the nonsense mutation are a red signal, is the red light that by mistake has been switched on at some point in the bridge. So the bridge is there, but there is inability for traffic to go through because of this signal that is, if you like, does not allow any flow. And what ataluren does is, in inverted comma, manipulates this red light and allows some traffic to get through. And therefore, while there still is a red light, and the ataluren does not correct the gene defect, but allows the body to have a little of traffic, a little of dystrophin that is produced despite this erroneous red signal that is indeed a stop in the wrong place. So I hope this makes sense.
It makes sense in a big nonsense situation like we were talking about. So thanks for your suggestion of the bridge. As you said, in Italy we use the idea of the instruction to bake pizza to represent the situation of the mutations in Duchenne. But it's a different world. So I would like to ask Pat, because she was involved in the huge effort made by the international community to create a registry for Duchenne in 2007, 2012, the first years of the Treat nmD project, which helped us a lot to bring the new registry. So Pat, do we really add the need to create another registry?
Well, Filippo, I think, first of all, how do you know anything unless you have data? And I think that's really important to patients because, they have discussions with their healthcare provider about how can I help my son? What's going to be useful for him? And when we're talking about the STRIDE registry, in particular with ataluren, so this is a drug, as you've both described, it sort of allows the flow of traffic, if you will, or the expression of dystrophin. And for all of us who've lived in this world, dystrophin is the holy grail, the protein that's missing. And I think we all believe that if you can get it back to some degree, some percentage, that you should see a difference in the progression of this disease. So I think it's important to collect data. I think it's the only way that we're going to understand what interventions work on what children, because if we think about the 10% who have these nonsense mutations, it's not all in one area of the gene, right? It's across that very large gene. So who does this work for? How well does it work? Those are discussions we need to have with our healthcare providers to make the best decisions. But it's also a discussion that we have with payers who are asked to pay for drugs that are expensive. It's also with policymakers who are looking at rare diseases, and sometimes early on when we were first together in 1994, as you know, policymakers said rare diseases were not so interested in them. And so we've made the case that, first of all, every person in the world has value and is important, and we need to do the very best possible. So I think registry data is important. The other issue is in a clinical trial setting that Francesco said was usually very small, sometimes a year, maybe at the most 2 years. Those children in that study are a very sort of tight group of people. They look the same, not physically, but they are the same age, often with the same characteristics, able to do certain functions in a certain period of time. And in that trial, then you're looking at, from my point of view, a setting that isn't real life, right? This is sort of this group of people that you're testing to look at or answer the question, is this drug safe and does it work? But as we know, life has lots of variations, where you live, the temperature of the environment, the values your family places, and even if we look at some of the outcome measures, what's important to your family may not be as important to my family. So I think trying to understand the impact of this drug in a real world setting in the lives of these children and the ripple effect it has on their families. And I think for all of us to be able to prove that this particular drug, or any intervention for that matter, slows the progression of this disease, gives us more time, gives this individual more time before he loses those milestones that are important to him. I think that is the reason we have registries. And so I think this data is critically important. It is the first post-marketing registry, a rigorous post-marketing registry that we have. And I think it's a very good model for us to learn, because as we do, and as we see all these wonderful other opportunities that come along, whether they're specific for mutation, deletion, duplication, point mutation, or whether they're replacing a microdystrophin, or whether they're looking at inflammation, to understand what this does. And I think the final point that I'll make as I go on, I think all of us as parents, when we watch this disease, a year sometimes doesn't give us the full effect of what's going on, right? So if we're looking at 12 to 18 months in a clinical trial, it's very hard, depending on the age you're talking about and depending on the progression, to be able to say in that age that this is in the long term, we're going to see this. So you need to see the data, and I will raise the issue of steroids and say, we knew steroids worked. As parents, we knew they worked, right? We didn't know really the full effect. We just saw in the short term, our children did better. They looked straighter, they had more energy, however we capture that, and they walked better. It's like been years. It took us 20 years to say, oh, here's what steroids actually do in the long haul. So I think that brings home why this registry is important. We don't have 20 years. We don't want to take 20 years to figure out something's working or not. We want real answers and as quickly as possible. So I think the value of this registry has been, first of all, an incredible model. Second of all, I think for parents to be engaged in this and understand the data is important to everyone, them, the physicians, the policymakers, the payers. And so I think these registries, and in particular this registry of these, I think over 200 boys for a period of 4 or 5 years, is extraordinary, because now we know. For the naysayers that say this drug doesn't work, or the people who believe that it's magic, we have definitive evidence of here's what it does and here's what you can expect.
Thanks, Pat. So this gives me the chance to try to describe a little bit better, to ask Francesco to describe a little better how this STRIDE registry works. Because we decided that it's a register, and we decided that it's also a trial. So the patients needs to be enrolled, need to undergo a certain number of assessment during the year. And most of all, if it is a trial, do we have results? Was it worthwhile to participate in this trial, what kind of information we have now after 5 years?
Well, I think that the registry collects information on individuals, and because this is information that contains sensitive information such as your diagnosis, your genetic diagnosis, your name, and so on and so forth, the data needs to be collected with the consent of the families and the assent of the young people, and is collected centrally. Then, of course, there is a step where the data become pseudo-anonymized, so the names will never travel to centrally for the people who collected the central information. It is slightly different from a clinical trial because, excuse me, in a clinical trial, there is a formal training of the various investigators, of the therapist, and I think an important point that Pat made, the clinical trial have a very strict inclusion-exclusion criteria. So I think that it is therefore much more relaxed than a clinical trial because it reflects what happens in the real life. Having said that, of course, there needs to be information that is captured. This information is broadly of two types. One relates to safety. If there is new adverse event, I make an example. This is just an example. If every other individual receiving ataluren or any other drug develop headaches, well, I think it's important to know. And I think this is captured in the information because if there is a new side effect, it needs to be reported to the health authorities. The second, there are what we call functional outcome measures that measure the efficacy of the drug in terms of ability for the individual to walk, for example, ability to move in the upper limb, and ability to breathe with the respiratory function. I think there is also, although this is not a clinical trial, coming back to the point, there is also an element of alignment and education of the entire working group. Alignment means that people, especially now that there are registries in different countries and data collected in different countries, people need to speak a similar language. And I make an example now. Simple things such as age at loss of ambulation, that we all think we understand what it means. Well, there may be 4 or 5 different ways to define this. In some places is loss of ability to walk 10 meters, in other to walk 3 steps, and so on and so forth. And therefore, alignment of thoughts so that we all speak the same language is important for this registry and, of course, for the future generation of registry for other drugs. The second aspect related to the education is also education about physicians, because as it was pointed out, the nonsense mutation are very rare type of misspellings in the DMD gene. Now we understand them better. Originally, not everybody completely understood that. And what was interesting in the early reiteration of the ataluren, it transpired that a small proportion, but it's not 1%, there was a small proportion of individuals who were given ataluren by mistake because they did not have a red stop in the middle of the bridge. They had a different mutation that looks similar, but is quite different in terms of how ataluren would have never been able to help that particular misspelling. Now, it was therefore, for example, in our own registry in the UK, after we realized that there was occasional mistakes, and people make mistakes, I make mistakes, unfortunately everybody, and the only way to avoid to make mistakes is to go through the mistakes to avoid for them to happen again. And therefore now in the UK, for example, we have a system where every single child who will receive ataluren needs a vetting committed to say this mutation is eligible, this mutation is not, because otherwise there were a small number of children who were given the drug for the wrong reason. Again, this is an example of how registry improve our clinical practice and our the way we understand the disease. I think in terms of your question as well, is anything coming out of this registry? I think there have been now very recently published a few papers. One that just gives more the information regarding how many people are, what are the baseline characteristics, but more recently, probably a more important manuscript that summarizes both safety aspect, and the important thing is there was nothing new compared to what already reported, and basically ataluren remained a drug that was tolerated well by the great majority of the individuals. That I think is reassuring, because there was no new safety signal after the, if like the clinical trial. And in terms of the efficacy, the data have mostly on ability to walk and loss of ambulation, coming back to the point that was made earlier on, suggest that the data compared to external control, and there was a match control analysis done with the children in the Synergy American network, that there was an effect in delaying the ability to, in prolonging the ability to walk and therefore delaying loss of ambulation, that broadly speaking confirms the data from the original clinical trial. So this gives confidence that the real world data are replicating what was found in a smaller and more better characterized and better defined group of children who were recruited in the original clinical trial. And lastly, there are, these registries lasting 5 years will take longer to have a bigger separation of the respiratory function, because respiratory function in younger people with DMD is still very well preserved, but there is some indication of, in the more recent data cut, that the people treated with ataluren appear to have better respiratory function compared to the people who did not, who were unable to receive ataluren. So I think broadly speaking, therefore, the clinical trial data appear to be confirmed, the safety appear to be confirmed.
Thank you. This is what we wanted to hear, something reassuring in these very sad times. So this is a very happy information we received now. So I would like to ask Pat to help us to get a take-home message, but just before this, I would like to remember to all the people that are following this meeting that they have the opportunity and the possibility to ask questions using the chat tool inside Zoom. You will find the icon just under the imaging of us three. So if you want to use the chat service to ask questions, we will be happy to reply some of them until we have time. I feel probably another 15 minutes. So Pat, can you help us to get a take-home message?
Sure. First of all, reassuring, I think, as you just mentioned, reassuring, and this reassures the value of the registry. I think it's also reassuring to families, because as we try to make decisions for our children, we want to make sure that they are good decisions, right? And so it is reassuring to have this STRIDE registry and registries like this, because it does reassure that our decision-making process is good. I also think that this data in the larger scheme of things is able to help us better understand progression of this disease, so that we understand that as long as you delay, or if an intervention delays the loss of ambulation, for example, then the rest of the milestones are also delayed. The pulmonary, the respiratory effort is maintained, cardiac is maintained. So as long as we can push out those numbers and preserve this young man for as long as possible, then as we think about it and more therapies come online, we're able to keep pushing that number so that we have more time for our children. And I think for those who contribute to the registry, to know your data is important. I know so many times, families will think, well, I'm only one person, but the importance of that one data set really enables all the rest of the data. So the take-home messages are, these are really important. This is an incredibly important registry. It should be reassuring to all of us that we're learning all the time, learning and pushing out those milestones so that our young men can live long, productive lives. And I think that knowing that a drug delays the loss of these functions should be very important to all of us as we look at therapies across this population. And I think the other thing I can say, Filippo, for you is that sharing this data has been so critically important for all of us, right? So this is not just a STRIDE registry of the European countries where ataluren is approved. This is important for the field because we can learn from this and then measure other therapies against it. So I wanted to thank you, and thank you for including me in this conversation.
Oh, well, there's nothing to thank. I always have to thank you. But this probably, today meeting was something like a rehearsal, something like a trailer for the next big event coming in the next month, because in February we will have our conference. Again, it will be a virtual conference, not again something that we can experience in person like we always did in the past in Rome, all together with all the other families from around the world and all these wonderful contributors from the Duchenne community. So again, in 1 month, we will be in front of another computer, sadly, but we have a chance to be all together again with the larger community of Duchenne. So this is a good chance to thank you, to thank Francesco, and to thank Pat. And your contribution today was precious, and we hope to continue to do a lot of good things together. And we will see you all in 1 month, around 1 month, should be around the 16th of February, in Rome, but virtually in Rome. So we will try to give you a panorama or an overview of Rome while we will be discussing Duchenne topics. So thank you again. Thank you, O.M.a.R. Thank you, Rare Lab, and thank you, PTC Therapeutics, for the unconditional grant. Thank you. See you next time.
Thank you, Filippo.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.
Bye-bye, Pat.